The clinking of glasses at Daniel's stopped. Sarah, her perfectly manicured hand waving dismissively, laughed. "Oh, Mark, you're so dramatic. We talked about this last week, remember?" Her friends giggled, their eyes on me. I stood exposed, a spectacle in the hushed room, the consequence of her casual cruelty. She shrugged. Some things just aren't meant to last. Mark Jensen, a sharp M&A lawyer, clinches a massive deal, showcasing his ruthless precision. He first spots Sarah Miller, a social media influencer, in the back, scrolling on her phone, looking too cool for school. Sarah walks right up to Mark after the meeting, radiating confidence, introducing her 3 million followers. Mark, usually all logic and numbers, finds himself agreeing to an interview, a departure from his usual playbook. One coffee leads to dinner, then late-night drinks, then a sunrise walk along the river, him falling faster than expected. 2 weeks later, Sarah moves into his slick Tribeca apartment, transforming his minimalist space into a wild photo shoot set. His life, once predictable court dates, now includes impromptu kitchen shoots and mysterious product art deliveries. Sarah tells him he works too hard making money, urging him to enjoy it and spend on experiences, not just status. Their time together is passionate, uninhibited. She even pokes fun at his legal brief approach to intimacy. Mark finds himself rescheduling client meetings, deeply in love, ignoring raised eyebrows and a quiet warning from his boss, Dale Stevens. Sarah, without looking up from her phone, casually suggests he could just retire and travel the world with her. Mark's caught off guard by her forgetfulness, realizing she lives completely in the moment, yesterday's big talk evaporating. 6 months in, Sarah publicly humiliates Mark at a fancy restaurant, dismissing his feelings in front of her giggling friends. Mark, quiet and steady despite the storm inside, pays the whole bill, including a ridiculous tip, then walks out. He leaves, looking her dead in the eye, thinking, "I settle scores, and I was just getting started." The air in the boardroom still hummed with the afterglow of a 7-figure signature. Mark Jensen leaned back in his leather chair, a faint smile playing on his lips. The final clauses of the merger agreement were inked, the deal sealed with a precision that had become his trademark. He wasn't one for grand gestures or chest thumping. The satisfaction came from the quiet click of pieces falling into place, from knowing the countless hours of negotiation, the strategic pressure points, had culminated in this exact outcome. His clients across the table offered firm handshakes, their gratitude a silent acknowledgement of his ruthless effectiveness. He saw himself as a craftsman, shaping fortunes with contracts instead of hammers. As the room slowly emptied, a figure lingered in the back, perched on a visitor's chair. Sarah Miller, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone, seemed utterly detached from the high-stakes financial ballet that had just concluded. She wore an expensive, casual confidence, her fingers scrolling with practiced ease. Her presence was an anomaly, a splash of vibrant color in a monochrome world of corporate suits. She walked straight towards him, not a hesitant step in her stride, as he gathered his papers, her manicured hand extended, cool and firm. "Mark Jensen, right? I'm Sarah Miller. I watched you work." Her smile was dazzling, a professional shine. "My 3 million followers would love to hear about this deal. You're good." Mark, usually shielded by a logical, numerical wall, felt an unfamiliar crack. He found himself agreeing to a coffee, then an interview, a request so far removed from his usual professional landscape that it caught him off guard. It was an impulse, a momentary lapse in his calculated existence. One coffee had spilled into dinner, then into late-night drinks where her laughter echoed easily through the quiet bar. A sunrise walk along the Hudson River, the city waking up around them, cemented something new. He found himself falling, faster than he ever thought possible for a man who had built his life on careful ascent. 2 weeks later, Sarah's vibrant energy filled his sleek Tribeca apartment. His minimalist space, once a quiet testament to order, transformed. Suddenly there were tripods in the living room, racks of designer clothes spilling over his pristine couch, and the kitchen island became a set for impromptu photo shoots featuring obscure health drinks. His life, once a predictable sequence of court dates and client meetings, now included mysterious product deliveries and the rhythmic clicks of a camera. She'd watch him work late, perched on the armrest of his sofa, then tap his shoulder. "You work so hard making money, Mark," she'd say, her voice soft but firm. "You forget to enjoy it. Life isn't just about status, it's about experiences." And he found himself listening, rescheduling an evening briefing for a spontaneous flight to Miami, buying tickets to a concert he wouldn't have considered a month ago. Their time together was uninhibited, a stark contrast to his reserved nature. She'd tease him, calling his methodical approach to intimacy his legal brief, then pull him close, dissolving his carefully constructed defenses with a laugh. He found himself rearranging client meetings, deep in a love he hadn't known he needed. He started to notice the subtle glances from colleagues, the slightly raised eyebrow from Dale Stevens, his senior partner, during a hurried phone call about a rescheduled deposition. Dale's quiet, "Everything all right, Mark?" had been less a question, more a gentle warning. One evening, Sarah sat on the edge of his bed, scrolling through her feed, the blue light reflecting in her eyes. "You know," she said without looking up, "you could just retire. We could travel the world. Imagine, no more early mornings, no more endless documents." Her tone was as casual as discussing the weather. He stared at her, caught off guard. He remembered this conversation from weeks ago, her enthusiastic plans for a remote island escape. Now it was just a fleeting thought. Yesterday's big talk already evaporated from her mind. It was a realization that settled in his gut, a cold, hard stone. She lived so completely in the moment that memory seemed optional. 6 months had passed. We were at Danielle's, a fancy midtown restaurant, celebrating what she called her latest brand partnership. Her friends, a collection of equally polished young women, sat around the table, their phones occasionally flashing. When I tried to talk about something that had been bothering me, a feeling I couldn't quite articulate, she cut me off. Her laugh echoed sharp and bright as she dismissed my attempt. "Oh, Mark, you're so dramatic. We talked about this last week, remember? Some things just aren't meant to last." Her friends giggled, their eyes on me. I felt the familiar burn of public humiliation. I remained quiet, steady, despite the storm brewing inside. I caught the waiter's eye, a silent signal. The bill arrived. I paid the whole thing, adding a ridiculous tip that made the waiter's eyes widen. Then I stood up, met her gaze, held it for a beat, and walked out. I settled scores, and I was just getting started. Mark, back in his apartment, fueled by cold anger, begins to lay out a lawyer's kind of revenge. He realizes Sarah's entire career, her fame and income, is a fragile house of cards built on carefully crafted endorsements. He starts digging discreetly, using his network and firm's resources to access her contracts and business dealings. Mark uncovers vague clauses, assumptions, and shortcuts in her agreements, all ripe for exploitation. He remembers casual remarks she made about her finances or vision, which now seem like careless admissions. He targets a major brand deal, seeing it as the main artery to cut, threatening her lavish lifestyle. Mark quietly enlists a rival firm, setting them up to act on behalf of a fabricated, concerned client, covering his tracks. He initiates a slow, steady stream of whispers, subtly spreading doubts about Sarah's authenticity and reliability among PR contacts. He has junior associates investigate public records and tax filings for potential weak points, unknowingly aiding his plan. Sarah, still unaware, posts another perfect photo online, while Mark meticulously tightens the screws of his intricate scheme. He finds grim satisfaction in the precise, methodical work, a stark contrast to the chaotic passion she had brought. Dale Stevens, Mark's boss, observes his renewed focus but also a new intense solitude about him. Mark practices maintaining a neutral expression, ensuring no one can link him to the approaching storm, especially if Sarah's name arises. The door of Mark's Tribeca apartment clicked shut behind him, sealing off the city's noise, but not the echo of Sarah's laughter. The polished concrete floors felt colder than usual under his dress shoes. The space, once a sanctuary of minimalist order, now seemed to hum with a silent accusation. He walked to the window overlooking the Hudson, the city lights reflecting on the dark water. The anger wasn't hot and blinding. It was a cold, clear, calculating certainty. It settled in his bones, turning his hurt into something precise and actionable, a lawyer's kind of revenge. He thought of Sarah's world, the curated perfection of her online presence, the endless stream of sponsored posts. He'd seen it up close, the carefully chosen filters, the staged, spontaneous moments. Her entire existence, her glittering fame, her significant income, was a house of cards. Each endorsement, each brand partnership was a critical support beam, and he knew exactly how fragile those beams could be. They relied on an image, a narrative, and he understood how easily a narrative could unravel. He started digging the next day, not with overt actions, but with subtle inquiries. A casual call to a contact in entertainment law, a hypothetical question to a junior associate about influencer contract clauses. He wasn't using firm resources directly for personal vendetta, but leveraging his network, his reputation. He knew who to ask, how to frame the questions, making it seem like background research for an upcoming client. He needed to see her contracts, understand the structure of her agreements, pinpoint the vulnerabilities. What he found confirmed his suspicions. Sarah, charismatic and intuitive, was not a meticulous contract reader. There were loose threads, vague clauses, and assumptions where a more experienced hand would have demanded specificity. Her managers, eager to capitalize on her rapid rise, had often prioritized speed over rigorous legal protection. Shortcuts taken, clauses left deliberately ambiguous, all ripe for exploitation. He noted a few instances where exclusivity was poorly defined, or where performance metrics were more subjective than concrete. Bits of their conversations came back to him, small, careless admissions that now played like damning evidence. "Oh, my manager handles all the boring stuff," she'd once said, waving a dismissive hand when he'd asked about a complex IP clause. Another time she'd laughed, "My vision is basically just making things look pretty, the brands fill in the details." These hadn't seemed significant then, just glimpses into her carefree approach. Now they were pinpointing her weaknesses, confirming her dependence on others to manage the specifics. He zeroed in on her biggest deal, a multi-year partnership with a global beauty conglomerate. This was the main artery, the one that funded her lavish lifestyle, her expensive apartment, the constant stream of new fashion. Cutting this would not just hurt, it would be a professional amputation. He saw the weak spots, a moral clause that was broad enough to be interpreted, performance metrics tied more to engagement potential than guaranteed reach. Mark moved quietly. He didn't want his name connected. A few days later, a junior lawyer from a rival firm, one he had worked opposite on a previous deal, received an anonymous tip. The tip led to an inquiry, framed as coming from a concerned client with vague interests in the influencer market. It initiated a preliminary investigation into Sarah Miller's contractual obligations and adherence. Mark made sure his tracks were covered, his involvement untraceable. He also started a slow, steady drip of whispers. Not outright accusations, but subtle questions planted in casual conversations with PR contacts and brand managers he knew. "Heard anything about Sarah Miller's recent engagement numbers? Just wondering," he might say. Or, "The market's getting so saturated, it's hard to tell what's authentic anymore." These were not direct attacks, but insidious doubts, like tiny cracks appearing in a flawless facade. Authenticity was currency in Sarah's world, and undermining it was lethal. He even had a few of his junior associates, bright, eager, and completely unaware, look into public records related to several LLCs often used by influencers, including one he suspected was Sarah's. Standard due diligence for a potential client in the digital marketing space, he'd told them, handing over a list of names. He asked them to check tax filings, past business registrations, anything that might reveal a weak point, a financial inconsistency, a previous legal spat. Meanwhile, Sarah, blissfully unaware of the tightening noose, posted another perfect photo, a sun-drenched selfie from a luxury resort, a caption about manifesting dreams. Mark, unseen, sat in his office, clicking through legal documents, meticulously tightening the screws of his intricate plan. A grim, quiet satisfaction settled over him. It wasn't the fiery passion Sarah had brought to his life, but a cold, measured control. It was the satisfaction of a craftsman, of someone who understood precision and consequence. Dale Stevens, Mark's boss, noticed. He remarked on Mark's sharp focus, his long hours back in the office, his meticulous attention to detail on cases. But he also observed a new intense solitude. Mark was polite, efficient, but distant. The easy camaraderie had vanished. "You're working hard, Mark," Dale commented one afternoon. "Glad you're back in the saddle." Mark just nodded, a non-committal hum. He practiced his neutral face in the mirror each morning, preparing for the moment Sarah's name might inevitably come up, ensuring no one could connect him to the storm he was brewing. The first shoe drops. A major skincare brand abruptly pulls their endorsement deal with Sarah, citing new brand direction. Sarah is floored, blaming the economy or some online spat, never suspecting the quiet hand pulling the strings. Mark had ensured the contract cancellation was messy, leaving Sarah with penalties and little recourse, based on the flaws he'd found. He lets a few carefully chosen but anonymous sources hint at Sarah's behind-the-scenes demands and diva behavior to industry magazines. Sarah's agent calls, panicked, noting an odd pattern of other potential deals suddenly going cold, sensing a coordinated effort. Mark's whispers become a quiet hum among the high-end brands. Is Sarah Miller really worth the investment anymore? A luxury car company, just days from signing a big campaign with her, backs out, leaving Sarah fuming and confused. She notices her online engagement isn't quite what it used to be, and the flow of free luxury goods has slowed to a trickle. Mark keeps his own legal career soaring, using his razor-sharp focus, making sure his firm sees only professional success. He starts looking into her personal finances, knowing that when the big money stops, even the smallest misstep can become a problem. Sarah, a little desperate, sends Mark a casual text, trying to reconnect, but he ignores it, a ghost in her past. He thinks about her old comments about his money, and a cold satisfaction settles in as he watches hers slowly dry up. Her perfect, curated online life, once so shiny and aspirational, begins to show faint, almost imperceptible cracks. Mark ensures every step is slow, deliberate, designed to cause the maximum amount of financial and psychological strain over time. The notification arrived on Mark's phone as he was reviewing a complex merger document, a brief, almost clinical report from his anonymous contact. The first shoe had dropped. Glow Skincare, one of Sarah's longest-standing and most lucrative brand partners, had abruptly terminated her endorsement deal. The official reason cited was new brand direction and a shift in marketing strategy. It was a common corporate euphemism, vague enough to avoid litigation, yet precise enough to cause immediate damage. Mark imagined Sarah's reaction. Floored, no doubt. He could almost hear her, blaming the fickle economy, or perhaps some minor online spat, a misunderstanding with a follower. She couldn't suspect the quiet, calculating hand pulling the strings. It was designed to be untraceable. He had ensured the contract cancellation was messy. The vague clauses he'd identified, the performance metrics that were more interpretive than concrete, had allowed Glow Skincare to trigger a termination with minimal penalty to themselves and maximum financial repercussions for Sarah. She was left with a hefty payment clawback clause and little recourse. It was a testament to the power of precise legal language, or the lack thereof. Then came the subtle, insidious work. Mark fed a few carefully chosen, anonymous sources to minor industry magazines and gossip sites. Not outright slander, but hints, whispers about Sarah's behind-the-scenes demands, her unrealistic expectations, even a vague reference to diva behavior that made her hard to work with. These stories were carefully placed just enough to cause a ripple, but not enough to be easily traced back to him or his fabricated client. They were designed to plant seeds of doubt, to make brands question her reliability. Sarah's agent, a sharp woman named Chloe, called Mark's concerned client contact. Chloe sounded harried, frantic. She noted an odd pattern. Several other potential deals, once warm, had suddenly gone cold. Chloe sensed a coordinated effort but couldn't pinpoint the source. "It's like someone's putting out fires before they even start," she'd said to the contact, her voice tight with stress. Mark's whispers grew into a quiet hum among the high-end brands. During industry events, he'd overhear subtle shifts in conversation. Is Sarah Miller really worth the investment anymore? Someone might ask. Her engagement seems volatile. The narrative was beginning to take hold, subtly eroding her value. Authenticity, consistency, and reliability, the bedrock of an influencer's brand, were all being questioned. The next major blow came swiftly. A luxury car company, Mercedes-Benz, was just days from signing Sarah for a high-profile campaign. The deal was lucrative, a significant portion of her annual income. Then, without warning, they backed out. The reason given was a terse email: internal restructuring. Sarah, he knew, would be fuming, confused, lashing out at her agent and manager, trying to understand what invisible force was undermining her. She started to notice things herself. Her online engagement, once explosive, was now merely respectable. The deluge of free luxury goods, designer handbags, exclusive event tickets, high-end electronics, had slowed to a trickle. The flow had been a constant, a tangible measure of her influence. Now the absence was stark. The gifts had been a validation of her worth. Meanwhile, Mark kept his own legal career soaring. He channeled his intense focus, his cold precision, into his work. The partners at the firm saw only professional success. A man returned to his driven self, perhaps even more so. Dale Stevens nodded approvingly during review meetings. Mark was exceeding expectations, bringing in new clients, closing complex deals. He was untouchable within his professional sphere. He started looking into Sarah's personal finances, using the same discreet channels. He knew that when the big money stopped flowing, even the smallest misstep could become a glaring problem. He wanted to understand her burn rate, her overhead, how quickly her substantial savings would erode under the pressure of maintaining her lavish lifestyle without the constant influx of endorsement cash. He found luxury car leases, a high-rent penthouse, a constant stream of high-end personal services. Her expenses were immense, built on the assumption of endless income. Then a text message appeared on his old phone, the one he rarely used anymore. A casual emoji then. "Hey stranger, been thinking about you, how's life?" It was from Sarah, a flicker of something, not longing but a cold, hard satisfaction, passed through him. He ignored it. He was aghast in her past, an unread message. He thought of her old comments about his money, her casual dismissal of his hard work. "You just make it, Mark. I enjoy it." A grim smile touched his lips. Now he was watching hers slowly dry up, a precise, methodical drought. Her perfect, curated online life, once so shiny and aspirational, now began to show faint, almost imperceptible cracks. A slight lag in posting, a less enthusiastic caption, a subtle shift in the background of her photos. The gloss was fading. He ensured every step was slow, deliberate, designed to cause the maximum amount of financial and psychological strain over time. This wasn't a quick strike, it was a slow, calculated demolition. Sarah confronts her agent in a heated phone call, demanding answers for the sudden collapse of her deals. Her agent can only offer vague excuses and industry rumors, deepening Sarah's paranoia and helplessness. Mark then unleashes a barrage of minor yet legally complex challenges against Sarah's remaining smaller brand partnerships. He uses obscure contractual clauses and technicalities to make her existing agreements a liability, not an income stream. Sarah is forced to spend heavily on legal counsel, draining her accounts faster than she can make new deals. Her legal bills pile up, forcing her to cut back on the lavish spending that underpinned her lifestyle brand. Mark plants a quiet story with a lesser-known gossip site, hinting at Sarah's extravagant lifestyle and whispers of financial trouble. The small article, initially overlooked, gains traction as her other public problems begin to mount. Sarah's online presence becomes more reactive, defensive, even a little angry, alienating some loyal followers. Mark watches her public unraveling, experiencing a mix of grim satisfaction and a fleeting, unsettling emptiness. He receives a desperate, apologetic text from Sarah, vaguely recalling their past, asking for advice or help. Mark deletes the message without a second thought, her restaurant words echoing, cold and clear. Dale Stevens praises Mark for a particularly tough negotiation, unaware of Mark's other personal battle. Sarah's ever-present public smile starts to look forced, fragile, as Mark's relentless campaign intensifies. The muffled sound of Sarah's voice, sharp and agitated, came through his contact's discreet recording. She was confronting Chloe, her agent. "What is going on, Chloe? First Glow, then Mercedes. Now I can't even get a call back from anybody." Her tone was brittle, laced with a fear Mark hadn't heard before. She demanded answers, clarity for the sudden, bewildering collapse of her empire. Chloe's voice was weary, apologetic. "Sarah, I'm trying, honestly. There's just so much static. Industry rumors, people saying things about brand fit and long-term value. Nothing concrete, just a general chill." Chloe offered vague excuses, whispered bad timing, and market shifts. But her helplessness only seemed to deepen Sarah's growing sense of paranoia. The enemy was invisible, intangible, and everywhere. This was Mark's cue. He then unleashed a barrage of minor, yet legally complex challenges against Sarah's remaining, smaller brand partnerships. These weren't grand terminations, but insidious legal skirmishes. A cosmetics company received an anonymous tip about a subtle breach of an exclusivity clause on an old Instagram post. A wellness brand was quietly notified of a potential conflict of interest regarding an old product endorsement. He used obscure contractual clauses and legal technicalities, the kind only a meticulous M&A lawyer would unearth, to make her existing agreements more of a liability than an income stream. Each brand, faced with the prospect of legal battles or reputational risk, chose the path of least resistance, quietly severing ties or demanding renegotiations that heavily favored them. Sarah was forced to shell out big money for legal counsel, lawyers who charged by the hour to navigate the labyrinthine challenges Mark had created. Her accounts, once flush, were draining faster than she could make new deals as the income stream slowed to a trickle. The legal bills piled up. He knew from his discreet inquiries into her personal finances that her burn rate was high. She started to cut back. No more spontaneous private jet trips to remote islands. No more daily deliveries of fresh flowers. The lavish spending that was once the backbone of her lifestyle brand, the aspirational image she projected, had to be curtailed. The carefully curated perfection was becoming harder to maintain. Mark then planted a quiet story with a lesser-known gossip site, a publication hungry for content. It was a short piece, hinting at Sarah's extravagant lifestyle and whispers of financial trouble in high places. It was framed as speculation, nothing definitive, but enough to register. Initially, the small article was largely overlooked, a blip in the endless churn of online gossip. But as her other public problems started to mount, as brands distanced themselves and her online activity became less frequent, the article gained traction. It became a piece of evidence confirming the rumors, adding to the growing narrative of her decline. Sarah's online presence began to show the strain. Her posts, once effortlessly aspirational, became more reactive, defensive. A snarky reply to a comment questioning her authenticity, a terse caption addressing negative energy. Her polished, serene persona was cracking, revealing a raw, angry edge that alienated some of her loyal followers. They preferred the perfect, unblemished Sarah, not one battling unseen forces. Mark watched her public unraveling unfold from a distance. There was a grim satisfaction in seeing his meticulous plan bear fruit, each cut precise, each blow landing exactly where he intended. Yet underneath it all, a fleeting, unsettling emptiness would sometimes stir in his own gut. It was the residue of what had been, a phantom limb ache for a passion he'd allowed himself to feel. Then another text message appeared on his old phone. This one wasn't casual. "Mark, I know it's been a while and things ended badly. I'm really sorry for how I acted. I need some advice or just help." It was desperate, an olive branch offered in a storm. He read it, her words from the restaurant echoing in his memory, cold and clear. Some things just aren't meant to last. He deleted the message without a second thought. At work, Dale Stevens clapped him on the shoulder one afternoon. "Mark, that negotiation with Sterling White, brilliant. You tore them apart. I haven't seen you this sharp in years." Mark offered a slight smile, a professional acknowledgement. Dale was completely unaware of the other, more personal battle Mark was orchestrating, a battle that was a far more complex and satisfying exercise in precision. Sarah's ever-present public smile, the one that had launched 1,000 brand deals, started to look a little forced in her new posts, a little fragile. The pressure from Mark's relentless invisible campaign was mounting, and even her carefully constructed digital facade could no longer entirely conceal the cracks. A major lawsuit lands on Sarah's doorstep, this time from a prominent former brand partner, alleging fraud and breach of contract. Mark had meticulously supplied the brand with all the dirt, enabling them to build an airtight case against her. Sarah's lawyer advises her to settle, but the offer is brutal, demanding a huge chunk of her dwindling assets. Desperate, Sarah reaches out to Mark directly, pleading with him, appealing to his brilliance for help. Mark agrees to meet, keeping a cold, professional distance, offering her a sliver of false hope he knows won't last. During their meeting, he subtly points out the irreversible flaws in her past contracts, subtly sealing her fate. He offers advice that, if followed, would only serve to further ensnare her in legal and financial quicksand. Sarah is forced to start selling off her expensive art pieces and designer clothes, just to keep up with legal fees and daily expenses. Her once glamorous apartment begins to feel like a gilded cage as her income sources dry up completely. Mark ensures that any attempts Sarah makes to rehabilitate her image or secure new deals, are met with immediate, quiet counter-narratives. Her follower count, once her pride and joy, begins to visibly drop as her content shifts from aspirational to desperate. A former friend of Sarah's, emboldened by the public scrutiny, speaks out against her, airing old grievances and further damaging her reputation. Mark feels the heavy weight of his actions, understanding the sheer scale of the destruction he's wrought. But he pushes the feeling down. The satisfaction is potent, but a new, subtle hollowness begins to creep into his own successes, a quiet price he's starting to pay. The next major blow was a lawsuit, delivered directly to Sarah's Tribeca penthouse. This wasn't a quiet termination or a whispered rumor. This was a full-blown legal assault, filed by Luxora Cosmetics, a prominent former brand partner. The allegations were damning: fraud, breach of contract, misrepresentation of engagement metrics. Mark had spent weeks meticulously supplying Luxora with all the dirt, the inconsistencies in her analytics, the subtle deceptions in her reporting. He had enabled them to build an airtight case, one he knew she couldn't possibly unravel. Sarah's new lawyer, a harried man with tired eyes, advised her to settle. The offer was brutal, demanding a huge chunk of her dwindling assets, a sum designed to strip her bare and send a message. The walls were closing in, financially and legally. A call came from a blocked number. It was Sarah. Her voice was thin, desperate. "Mark, please, I know you're brilliant. You always were. I need your help. I made a mistake," she pleaded, appealing to the man she thought she knew, the one she'd dismissed. He listened, his face a mask of practiced neutrality. He agreed to meet, a sliver of false hope he knew was sometimes more cruel than outright rejection. We met at a quiet, anonymous coffee shop far from his office, far from any place they used to go. The fluorescent lights hummed above us. She looked different, the sparkle gone from her eyes, the effortless confidence replaced by a nervous energy. She wore less makeup. Her expensive clothes seemed a little less vibrant. He kept a cold, professional distance across the small table. "Tell me what's happening, Sarah," he said, his voice even. She recounted the lawsuit, the mounting bills, the agent's helplessness. As she spoke, he subtly pointed out the irreversible flaws in her past contracts, the vague clauses, the lack of ironclad protections he had discovered. He didn't gloat, just stated facts, legal realities. This exclusivity clause, for instance, it's written loosely, makes you vulnerable. He sealed her fate with his precise analytical insight, dissecting her past as if it were a client's failing merger. He then offered advice that, if followed, would only serve to further ensnare her. "You could try to countersue for reputational damage," he suggested, knowing it would bleed her dry with legal fees and accomplish little. "Or perhaps dig into their historical ad spend. Look for a leverage point, but that's a costly discovery process." It was advice designed to prolong her agony, to ensure she spent every last dollar fighting a losing battle. Back in her penthouse, Sarah was forced to start selling. First, the limited edition art pieces, then the designer handbags and dresses, each sale a public admission of her decline. Her once glamorous apartment, now stripped of its more extravagant items, began to feel like a gilded cage. The city outside, once a playground, now seemed to mock her as her income sources dried up completely. Mark ensured that any attempts Sarah made to rehabilitate her image or secure new deals were met with immediate, quiet counter-narratives. A carefully placed article would highlight her past excesses just as she announced a new, authentic direction. A whisper would reach a brand about her unreliable past, just as she tried to pitch a partnership. Her follower count, once her pride and joy, began to visibly drop. Her content, once aspirational, now carried a desperate undertone, alienating the very audience she'd cultivated. Then, a former friend of Sarah's, emboldened by the public scrutiny and the scent of blood in the water, spoke out. A tell-all interview in an online magazine aired old grievances, painted Sarah as manipulative and shallow, further damaging her already fractured reputation. Mark felt the heavy weight of his actions. He understood the sheer scale of the destruction he'd wrought. He had systematically dismantled a woman's entire career, her financial security, her public identity. The feeling was profound, almost physical, but he pushed it down, deep into the recesses of his calculated mind. The satisfaction was potent, a cold, hard triumph. But with each calculated blow, a new, subtle hollowness began to creep into his own successes. His latest deal, another multi-million-dollar merger, felt different. The thrill was muted, replaced by a quiet price he was starting to pay, a sense of quiet emptiness that lingered after the congratulations faded. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The major lawsuit against Sarah concludes with a crushing judgment that leaves her officially bankrupt, with nothing left. Her Tribeca apartment, the one Mark helped her make a home, is foreclosed upon. Her life stage disappears. Sarah's once vibrant social media platforms are now swamped with hateful comments, accusations of fraud, and public ridicule. Mark ensures the story of her spectacular downfall makes it into major business publications, detailing her financial ruin. He remains completely anonymous, allowing the legal system and market forces to appear to be the sole orchestrators of her demise. Stripped bare of her curated life, Sarah is forced to leave the city, moving back to her quiet hometown, out of the spotlight. Mark receives an anonymous email, perhaps from one of Sarah's old friends, detailing her shattered spirit and impoverished state. He sees a small article online, a grainy photo of Sarah looking utterly broken, unrecognizable from the confident woman he once knew. A wave of complex emotions washes over Mark. Grim satisfaction, yes, but also a strange lingering responsibility, and a sharp pang of something like pity. Dale Stevens congratulates Mark on another banner year, even mentioning a potential partnership, but notes Mark's unusual quietness and solemnity. Mark finds himself reflecting on the true cost of his revenge, not just for Sarah, but for the colder, harder man he has become. The emptiness that had subtly crept in before now feels pronounced, a vast chasm within him, despite his absolute victory. He questions whether the profound damage he inflicted was truly justice or simply an act of brutal, calculated vengeance. The finality of Sarah's ruin settles heavily on him, and Mark realizes the game, finally, is truly over. The news came through his network, concise and clinical. The Luxora Cosmetics lawsuit against Sarah had concluded. The judgment was crushing, an irrevocable financial ruin. She was officially bankrupt, stripped of every asset, every last dollar. The carefully constructed edifice of her wealth had crumbled, leaving nothing but dust. Days later, another piece of information, equally stark. Her Tribeca apartment, the one he had once shared, the one he had helped her make a home, was foreclosed upon. The stage for her meticulously curated life, where impromptu photo shoots captured her fabricated bliss, simply disappeared. The silence of that empty space, he imagined, would be deafening. Her once vibrant social media platforms, once bustling with aspirational comments and praise, were now swamped. The comments sections were a cesspool of hateful remarks, accusations of fraud, and public ridicule. The digital mob, once her fervent admirers, had turned on her with savage efficiency. He didn't have to seek them out. They found him. Tiny screenshots forwarded by his contacts, a grim highlight reel of her public undoing. Mark ensured the story of her spectacular downfall made it into major business publications, not as a personal vendetta, but as a cautionary tale for the burgeoning influencer economy. Articles detailed the precariousness of brand loyalty, the financial ruin of unchecked expenses, the dangers of vague contracts. Her name was mentioned, her financial ruin laid bare, but Mark remained completely anonymous. The legal system, market forces, and her own past decisions were presented as the sole orchestrators of her demise. He was just a ghost in the machine, an unseen hand. Stripped bare of her curated life, Sarah was forced to leave the city. He learned through another anonymous email, likely from a former acquaintance, that she had moved back to her quiet hometown in Ohio. Out of the spotlight, away from the judgmental glare of the city, attempting to disappear. The irony wasn't lost on him. An article buried deep in a regional online newspaper caught his eye. A grainy photo accompanied it. Sarah. She looked utterly broken, her eyes hollow, her once radiant face drawn and devoid of its customary shine. She was almost unrecognizable from the confident, vivacious woman he had once known. The woman who had effortlessly commanded a room, who had laughed in the face of his careful life. A wave of complex emotions washed over Mark. Grim satisfaction, yes, a cold triumph in seeing his plan executed with such devastating precision. But beneath it, a strange, lingering responsibility. He had done this. He had not just sought revenge, he had annihilated her. And with that thought came a sharp pang of something like pity, an unbidden, unsettling emotion he hadn't anticipated. Dale Stevens, Mark's boss, called him into his office later that week. Mark, another banner year. You've exceeded every metric. I'm thinking of proposing you for partner at the next meeting. Dale paused, looking at him. Though you've been a little quiet lately, more solemn. Mark nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible dip of his head. Just focused, Dale, he murmured. Busy. He found himself reflecting on the true cost of his revenge. Not just for Sarah, but for the colder, harder man he had become. The constant calculation, the deliberate cruelty, the sustained campaign of destruction. It had altered him. The emptiness that had subtly crept in before, after each successful maneuver, now felt pronounced, a vast chasm within him. Despite his absolute victory, the silence it left was deafening. He questioned whether the profound damage he inflicted was truly justice or simply an act of brutal, calculated vengeance. Had he sought balance or merely destruction? The line had blurred, then vanished entirely. The finality of Sarah's ruin settled heavily on him. The game, he realized finally, was truly over. Mark tries to bury himself back in his old routines, poring over contracts and closing deals. But the old thrill is gone. Sometimes, in quiet moments, a flash of Sarah's vibrant energy, even her most annoying habits, catches him off guard. He starts to understand that winning this particular battle has left him with no real peace, only a deeper, more cynical view of the world. Mark finds himself pushing away colleagues and old friends who comment on his increasingly distant and detached demeanor. He avoids social gatherings where Sarah's name or her public downfall might come up, unable to face casual judgment or pity. An awkward chance encounter with a mutual acquaintance confirms Sarah's utter brokenness in her life of quiet hardship. Mark overhears a conversation about karma and the price of ambition in relation to Sarah, and a sharp, unexpected pang hits him.